Well, hello again. It is Christmas week, and we're going to read part 6 of the final chapters of Tabitha's travels. We've learned that Tabitha and Eliakim have been released. Coponius let him go after finding out he was a Roman citizen. But now they've been stopped by King Herod and his soldiers, and that's where we pick up the story. Tabitha held tightly to her father's tunic. No matter what, she decided, I'm not leaving my father again. Herod stepped off his chariot and motioned for his men to pull Eliakim off his horse. They threw the shepherd to the ground, knocking Tabitha off in the process. True to her vow, she did not let go of her father and landed on top of him in the dirt.
So you think yourself better than a king,
Herod said, looking down at Eliakim.
A lowly shepherd.
Herod spat on Eliakim, but the shepherd said nothing.
What's this? No clever words, Herod taunted. No great oratory about being a citizen of Rome.
Again, Eliakim remained silent.
I am Herod the Great,
the king roared.
I am the king of all the Jews. How insolent of you to think yourself better than me.
Herod began stomping back and forth, pacing like a caged tiger.
Did you build the great fortress of Masada? Did you build the magnificent Caesarea or the palace of Herodium?
Herod stopped pacing and screamed in Eliakim's face.
Did you build the temple in Jerusalem?
The efforts of his rage caused Herod to double over in a fit of coughing. When he had finished, Tabitha thought he seemed near death. He looked out the corners of his eyes at Eliakim and said in a gurgled whisper,
I heard what you told Coponius. I heard about this new king to be born. Tell me now, or die. Where is this to happen, and when?
Eliakim pulled himself up straight and stared at the king, but then said nothing. Herod nodded to his guards, one of whom stuck the tip of his spear to Eliakim's throat. Your Herodians may well kill me, Eliakim said, but I will not reveal the secrets of the Messiah.
Then kill you they shall,
Herod said, and nodded to his guard. Tabitha screamed as the man pulled back his spear and re-aimed it at Eliakim's heart. But just before his arm came forward with a fatal throw, the cry of
Attack!
Came from somewhere in the surrounding hills. In moments, the entire group was circled by a dozen Roman soldiers. The Herodian guards were swiftly disarmed and held by the Romans. As the dust of the scuffle settled, a Roman centurion walked calmly into the center of it. The centurion stared at the king for a long moment, then said, Leave, Herod, or I shall finish the emperor's work for him. Herod scowled at the Roman, then abruptly turned and hobbled to his chariot. A moment later, all the Herodians were on their mounts and followed their king up the road to Jerusalem. The centurion turned to Eliakim and said, Coponius suspected your God might need a bit of help protecting you tonight. On the contrary, Eliakim smiled. My God knew exactly what he was doing. The centurion laughed and offered to accompany the group to Bethlehem, but Eliakim assured him that all would be well now. And so it was, an hour later, that Tabitha, Eliakim, Hasba, and Uzziah finally rode into the fields surrounding Bethlehem, and found there the caravan they had left so long before. Tabitha's mother screamed when she saw her husband, as did Hasbah's and Uzziah's wives. Tabitha hugged her mother and brothers, and stories of the day were told and retold around the campfire. A meal was prepared and bread baked. It is almost like a festival, Tabitha thought, only better. Finally, it was time to go to bed, and everyone said good night. Eliakim told his wife he wasn't ready to sleep, though, and would stand by the fire for a while. Tabitha couldn't sleep either, both from the excitement of the day and because her brothers were all snoring. So she lay on her bed, watching her father by the fire through the open flap in the tent. And it was then that she saw a small boy pushing a cart across the field. She watched as her father talked to the boy, a boy who looked remarkably like... Tabitha jumped up from her bed, pushed out through the tent, and ran barefoot across the field. "Jotham!" she called. "Jotham!" The boy turned and looked. "Tabitha!" he yelled, then ran to greet her, and the two hugged in a great reunion. Tabitha's heart was so full of happiness she wasn't sure it could hold it at all. But a moment later a thought struck her, and she broke away from Jotham and ran back to her tent. Digging through a food bag, she found what she was looking for and ran back to her friend. She held out to Jotham a loaf of bread she had baked that very night and said, "I baked for you every day, just as I promised." Jotham hung his head in embarrassment. "My mind would not forget you either." Then Tabitha decided she should probably explain that there were a few days she had not been able to bake. She started telling him of all her adventures, about thieves and snakes and Qumran, about meeting friends and serving kings. But soon she could tell that Jotham wasn't paying attention. In fact, he was staring over her shoulder, looking at something behind her. Suddenly the boy walked right around her and off into the dark. "Jotham," she said, "Jotham, where are you going?" A moment later she understood. On the other side of the field was a shepherd at a fire, and Jotham was now running toward him, calling out, "Father! Father!" And that's when Tabitha heard a woman scream. It came from her right, at the top of the hill. A scream, she was sure. A woman. There it was again. Without a second thought, Tabitha raced up the hill and into the town. She heard the scream again and looked around frantically. There, up on the left, she saw a glow of light coming from the stable below an inn. Another scream filled the air, and this time Tabitha knew where it came from. She hurried toward the stable. No, it's not Betcha. But before she got there, a man came running up the ramp and ran right into her. "Oh!" the man explained, huffing and puffing. "Forgive me, but I need your help. Quickly, child, run down to the next street, 2 doors on the right. Fetch me the midwife, Dorcas." The man's face was flushed, and he seemed very nervous. "Tell her to come to the inn of Hazra," he continued. "A baby is to be born at any moment." Tabitha almost laughed that the man was so afraid of a baby being born. But then she said, "As you bid," and she ran up the street. She found the midwife easily, then followed her back to the stable. There she saw the woman about to give birth, lying on a bed of hay, next to a trough used to feed the animals. It was dark in the stable, with only the light of one small oil lamp pushing back the darkness. But even in the dim light, Tabitha could see the grimace of pain and the sweat of labor on the woman's face. It was a look she had seen many times before, when the women of her caravan gave birth. Still, Tabitha could see that the woman had a beauty about her that was more than just pretty eyes or a handsome face. She seemed to glow within. Tabitha gasped. This was the same woman she had helped on the road to Herodium. "Do you think this will take long?" The voice startled Tabitha, and she jumped. She spun to her right to see the husband of the woman wringing his hands and looking nervous. I don't know, Tabitha said. Sometimes labor goes quickly. Sometimes it's as slow as a donkey. Is this her first baby? The man got a funny look on his face, a look that seemed to have a whole story behind it, but he just said, Yes, it is most assuredly her first child. Tabitha shrugged. Then it could take a very long time indeed. Only Jehovah knows. The man almost laughed. I will say amen to that, he said. Tabitha thought the man was acting strangely, but decided to say nothing more. She watched the woman in labor for a time, then decided she should get back to her own family. She turned and climbed the little ramp out of the stable, then made her way back to the fields of Bethlehem. As Tabitha descended the hill, she saw Jotham in his father's arms. She met a woman confused by all the commotion and learned that she was Jotham's mother. Tabitha led her over to be reunited with her son, then returned to her own camp, where she heard how Jotham had killed the old thief Decca. There was great rejoicing among all the people then, rejoicing that Jotham had found his family, rejoicing that Decca of Megiddo was no longer a threat. Tabitha found her father amidst all the cheering and laughter and gave him a hug around the waist. I shall never leave your side, she said. She looked up into her father's smiling face and thought that nothing in the world could possibly be better than this. In the next moment, Tabitha was proven wrong, as a bright light, brighter and more beautiful than any she had ever seen, filled the sky over their heads. Now imagine the most wondrous, glorious, fantastic thing you could have, or that could happen to you in the whole world. Now imagine something 1,000 times better. That's Jesus. How should you respond to his love for you? Well, that's the end of today's reading. We will have one final reading, which is to be listened to on Christmas morning. But of course, you can really listen to it at any time. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being with us.